Just like everyone who enjoyed a spin-off as it originally was back 15 years ago that ends up getting a remake for modern consoles, I am one of those people who ended up getting very ecstatic for that announcement to be a reality. However, I ask myself if that remake is just a full-fledged remake that follows everything from beginning to end in its narrative like the original release, or if that remake is more than just a remake. That is the main reason I will be discussing in this video. What is happening, guys? This is RRPG here, and I'm here to present another 2 cents video on the 2 cents block to you all. Based on the title of this video alone, I was referring to Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion that is coming out on the PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, and PC. Every modern platform that is available, pretty much. I did a live stream on the Final Fantasy VII 25th Anniversary Celebration broadcast that happened on June 16th with my reactions on the event. Aside from getting excited with learning new information on Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, and with the second installment of the remake continuity being called Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion was something I was not expecting to be a reality, even when rumors were popping up before the stream went live. The trailer they showed for the remake sold me in wanting to buy it when it releases this winter, because I enjoyed Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation Portable back in the day. I may have to double or even triple dip on this game for the PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and PC when I get the chance to purchase them separately. Anyway, that is aside from the point. The main point of this video is my belief that the remake to Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII is more than just a remake, much like how Final Fantasy VII Remake is more than just a remake to the original Final Fantasy VII. Before I get started, I want to make the clarification that this video is going to be spoiler heavy for those who have not played or learned about everything in relation to the overall Final Fantasy VII continuity, let alone the plot to the original Crisis Core. I recommend you to not watch this video until you have fully learned about or played the game, as well as Final Fantasy VII Remake for that matter. You have been warned. With that out of the way, let us begin. Ever since the announcement trailer for Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion became a thing, I got very excited for it to make a comeback. After spending about a few days recollecting my mind on the whole thing, I started to make the basis that the remake is not going to be just another simple remake, just like what Final Fantasy VII Remake ended up as. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is taking a similar approach, but I feel that the difference between this remake and the original game will be more centered on the ending. The ending to the game I am referring to is Zack's Last Stand, the event where Zack Fair meets his end before Cloud Strife began his journey as a hero. In the final scene to Crisis Core, and in that special cutscene that plays in Nibelheim for Cloud near the end of the original game, Zack fights off Shinra's military in his attempt to make it back to Midgar and reunite with Aerith. Unfortunately, it was not enough, as Shinra's public security managed to overwhelm the young soldier with the last few survivors delivering the coup de grace on the man. Upon his dying breath, Zack bequeaths Cloud the Buster Sword and has him promise to be his friend's living legacy so that Cloud can achieve Zack's dream of being a hero he could not become before he passes on. That last scene before the end of the game is faithful to how it was briefly shown in the original Final Fantasy VII, and people think of it as one of the most iconic moments in the overall narrative to the original game. Now, if you were to play through the entirety of Final Fantasy VII Remake, that is where things change for the ending that was shown in the original Crisis Core on the PSP. However, the change to the outcome of Zack's Last Stand is reflected towards the outcome of what all goes on in Final Fantasy VII Remake. While that game tends to be very faithful to what all goes on in the first part of the story, with Cloud and his comrades fighting against the Shinra Electric Power Company, peculiar circumstances happen where the characters will try to stray away from fate's course. Fate's course in the game is how the events of the original Final Fantasy VII play out. Whenever a character that is associated with the likes of Cloud and his allies end up doing something drastically different from their impending fate, these enigmatic specters in robes known as the Whispers will step in and correct the events that play out. For instance, in the scene where Barrett ends up relieving Cloud of his partnership with Avalanche after the bombing of Mako Reactor 1, the Whispers see that Fate's course is getting altered. In retaliation, they attack Barrett in the 7th Heaven Bar the next day, and it leads to Jessie getting hurt bad, where she ends up being forced off the mission to blow up Mako Reactor 5. Thus, Barrett requests Cloud's help, and the mission is carried on. With the characters taking that course, the Whispers ended up correcting the timeline of events so that it continues in their favor. In a way, the Whispers are these ethereal beings who represent the timeline of the original Final Fantasy VII, and the actions that Cloud and his friends try to do in Final Fantasy VII Remake show that they are challenging destiny. Ergo, when Cloud and his allies end up escaping from Midgar at the end of the game, they see images of what the future will become if they were to follow the same course as the original game's events. Zack's last stand plays out like it was supposed to, but when Cloud, Barret, Tifa, Aerith, and Red 13 fight against the Whispers and defeat them along with their leading unification called Whisper Harbinger, they end up changing the path of destiny, where the future will become an unknown journey to them going forward. It becomes even more so when they challenge Sephiroth, who appears to be different from the one that Cloud and the others are chasing. Cloud ended up defeating what is supposedly Sephiroth from the future, possibly after his defeats in the original game and in Advent Children, and defeating him has the rest of the Whispers end up being erased from existence after Cloud and the others defeated the few who try to fight them off. Upon the eradication of these enigmatic specters, outcomes within the timeline get changed, with a hinted indication that Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie are still alive after the Sector 7 plate collapsing onto the slums, and most importantly, Zack surviving his last stand and resuming his journey back to Midgar with Cloud by his side. By speaking towards the events of what happens in Final Fantasy VII Remake, I believe that Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is going to follow along that continuity and not the one based on the original timeline. I have other theories that support this aside from what happened in Final Fantasy VII Remake. One of these theories is that the trailer shows us the voice cast is going to be consistent to that of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that characters who were not voiced in the PSP original will get voiced in this remake. We hear the likeliness of Caleb Pierce, Tyler Hoechlin, and Brianna White voicing Zack, Sephiroth, and Aerith respectively when they are shown, so no Rick Gomez, George Newbern, or Andrea Bowen to voice those characters along with Steve Burton as Cloud, since Cody Christian will be voicing him instead. Another theory reflects on how the Buster Sword is designed. If you look at the Buster Sword on what it looks like in the original timeline for Final Fantasy VII, you can see that it does not have that blocky hilt at the bottom of the blade like what the original game had the sword designed as. Granted, it could be a coincidence seeing as how the Buster Sword is not consistent with its design in all things relating to Final Fantasy VII or the character Cloud in all spin-offs to the overall Final Fantasy IP, but the design of the sword since the remake continuity is established, where its design in Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is the same. Some might say that the design of the sword in Final Fantasy VII Remake is the same as the original game. You would be correct on that, but seeing how all companion material made the Buster Sword have more of an eloquent design structure, like having the gold hilt and the golden orb at the bottom of the handle, that rendition is likely what the sword was supposed to be in the original continuity, instead of the basic design they went with. Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion continues to use that design structure that acts as an amalgam to the basic design of the original Final Fantasy VII and how the sword was portrayed in all previous material in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, which Final Fantasy VII Remake used as its design for that game. The final reason why I feel that Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is more along the line of the remake continuity is because of the ending that we will see, and with it being an appetizer to what is going to come for the next game in the remake continuity, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The ending we are going to see is Zack Fair surviving his last stand like what was shown at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and not him being killed off like in the original Crisis Core. We got to remember that the ending in Final Fantasy VII Remake with Cloud and his friends defeating the Whispers and leaving the world of Gaia into a blank canvas with where the timeline is supposed to flow left many questions as to what is going to happen in the future. With the timeline being left widely open without a linear course taking place, we could see the outcome of certain characters being different, like Aerith surviving throughout the whole thing, and not being killed by Sephiroth in the City of the Ancients. Another hint that supports this is the first look trailer to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where Aerith says to not focus on the past, but to focus on the future, since the future is not set in stone for Cloud and everyone. On top of that, Cloud recollects that he thought Tifa was killed during the Nibelheim flashback, and she asks Cloud if he's implying that she is nothing but an imposter if he truly believes that she is dead. Finally, the end of the trailer showing Zack and Cloud arriving at Midgar has us hearing Cloud remembering who Zack is and wonders what happened to him and where he currently is right now. Aerith even chimes in with her saying that she has been trying to look for him since they were separated from each other from 5 years prior. Finally, Zack apologizes, and he feels that he failed both Cloud and Aerith due to the events that transpired during the Nibelheim incident to him arriving back to Midgar. More things to keep in mind are the taglines during the trailer, such as quote-unquote, "What is Sephiroth's endgame?" or even quote-unquote, "What is fact and what is fiction?" being shown. With no clear meaning as to what the words remake, rebirth, and whatever the impending third word mean in the trilogy of the remake continuity, we can only assume that the ending that we will get in Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion will only paint a broader picture as to what we will expect in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the game that is to follow. These are the reasons why I feel that Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is not going to be the remake that everyone is expecting. I would say that it is going to be like the original at around 90% of the experience, but I could be mistaken on this. However, given the events of how Final Fantasy VII Remake played out, it leads me to believe that Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is more than just what we saw and what we are going to get when it arrives around this winter. Because of the circumstances of what happened during Final Fantasy VII Remake, I am certain that Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is going to anger many purists who still cherish the PSP original, much like how Final Fantasy VII Remake made several fans of the original Final Fantasy VII very disappointed, based on story reasons. While I do see the continuity of what we are seeing being that of a remake to Final Fantasy VII in the overall story, I come to now believe that the term remake is very loose, and not just being the exact same thing as what many have played in the past. Surprisingly, there is a general opinion from those who do not wish to see a remake receive a fresh coat of paint, as they want to experience more than what they got from an original creation. I am one of those people who wants to see a fresh new take within a remake, because I feel that just remaking a game from the ground up, and just like how it was structured from beginning to end at verbatim as its original source material, is underwhelming. This is a major reason why I feel that the remakes of Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 were very spectacular, because they did not do everything the same as their original creations, as Capcom took those blueprints and gave them a makeover that was completely fresh and exhilarating for both titles. There are other remakes that I enjoy, such as Mega Man Maverick Hunter X and Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes, but when I look back at them, they were nothing but a fresh coat of paint for both games, as hardly anything new was placed in them to be considered worthy investments. I guess you can say that I expect more than what I get when it comes to remakes, because I see games getting remade only with a fresh coat of paint as remasters, whereas games that add more than what was there in an original creation or built within a new template outside of its original form are worthy to be considered remakes. The remake continuity for Final Fantasy VII fits in both bills, and what we got for the first part only being set in Midgar was pretty much how I imagined the classic game getting a new look and modern twist to its design. With that being said, I do feel that there is an alternative for those who want an experience that is far more faithful to the original Final Fantasy VII, and that game would be Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis that is coming out on the iOS and Android platforms this year. Why do I consider it to be an alternative for those who want a remake of Final Fantasy VII that is more faithful to the original in terms of gameplay, visuals, and story? Look at the tagline at the beginning of the debut trailer in the new one we received. It says, quote-unquote, "another possibility for a remake." That possibility shows not only the original Final Fantasy VII being remade, but the other stories in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII are being remade in the same template as the PlayStation original as well. If you look at the trailer, we can see the episodes playing in the same format as with the original game, where the backgrounds look pre-rendered and with the character models looking very chibi-like in their appearance. Plus, the active time battle system looks to be there along with the numerous abilities each character can utilize. Of course, they are being made with the mobile architecture in mind, so it is easy to see that the game is going to incorporate in-app purchases and gacha elements like every other mobile game out there. Even though that is the case, there can always be a possibility that they will get ported over to the home video game consoles in the future, like how Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition got an HD re-release. But I would assume that the team behind the game will tailor them to play with game controllers in mind, and not by the press of your fingertips. However, Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis will be a hook to the remake continuity as well, but I am certain that the stories of Crisis Core, the original Final Fantasy VII, Before Crisis, Advent Children, and Dirge of Cerberus will remain faithful to the original timeline, with the bonus episode also following suit. That bonus episode is focused on Sephiroth's youth during his early days in Soldier, but the outcome of everything within Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis will most likely give a glimpse as to what is going to happen in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or what comes after that. People say that the remake continuity is following suit to the Kingdom Hearts IP with a theme to stand up and defy destiny, but I believe it is the other way around. Since the original Final Fantasy, the games have always told the tale of a group of heroes who stand up to fate and not follow its course, meaning that they hope to save their own worlds from a villain who threatens that world order. Final Fantasy VII is no different, as well as the remake continuity. Every game has been like that since the series' conception in 1987, and Kingdom Hearts followed that idea while taking it into the path of the bizarre and unorthodox. I guess you could say that since the Kingdom Hearts series is just as popular as Final Fantasy is, people have been indifferent with their opinions about which came first with the themes because of the series' more simplistic but complicated approach than Final Fantasy, since the stories in those games are very deep. As I said, the remake continuity to Final Fantasy VII is truly no different when it follows the theme of heroes standing up to face destiny, but I believe that the results we get out of the whole trilogy will be different from what we experienced, while still bringing in a satisfying conclusion to the overall arc. I strongly believe that Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion will follow the continuity of the remake storyline, but I could also be mistaken, as the game could be a straight-up remaster of the original PSP title. However, I guess we will find out this winter when the game launches worldwide on the home consoles and PC. Alright dudes, those are my honest thoughts about Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion and what it will bring for the remake continuity for Final Fantasy VII. Now I want to hear your own 2 cents. Do you share my same belief about the game, or do you not? If you do not, then let me know why. Be sure to rate this video as well as leaving your feedback down in the comments. Also be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell notification icon to be alerted of all new videos coming from me in the future that you won't find anywhere else. This is RRPG signing off by saying Godspeed and game on, gamers. Have a good one.